Hi, I'm Bill Endres. Thank you for joining me. Welcome to the golden age of digitization. And I want to talk about a new entry, virtual reality. However, I think it's significant before we start talking about something new entering in to think about where we are at this current moment and why digitization is so important or what's significant to it. It's a change in photographic process from chemistry to mathematics. Previously, we needed film, we needed chemicals, we needed to develop film with those chemicals and then actually print the films. With the digital, suddenly it's all mathematics, it's all electronic, which means that the data we collect from reflected light for our visualizations can actually be manipulated in a multitude of ways, mathematically enhanced. It's malleable. Also, it can be visualized in a number of different ways. We can print it out, we can print it on a rock if we want to, or we can send it over the internet. We can make it large, we can make it small. We can do just a lot of things with it. It's very, very flexible. Now, digital images are also important because they're part of a whole network of technologies. We've got a digital ecosystem now. And what that means is that we have our own distribution system. We can distribute things through the web. We also have wonderful devices like our phones, which we can use to either view digital images of manuscripts in the medieval times, or we can actually take images of manuscripts. The other thing that's important is, as part of a digital ecosystem, there's other fields that are actually generating software, like the NIH funded the development of ImageJ, which is image analysis software that can also be used to recover content that has been damaged in manuscripts through imaging. Now, prior, something like microfilm, which was very wonderful at its time, it had a drawback. It's in black and white, but it also needed to be distributed. So it's distributed in rolls and boxes. It also needed a separate type of viewer. So consequently, it had a whole lot of technology connected to it that made it much more difficult to get off and running. And there was great activity in microfilming from the 1940s to the 1960s, 1970s. And that's a wealth of information I don't want to lose. Now, why are we in a golden age of digitization? Why would I even begin to think that? Well, the sheer numbers and access to manuscripts digitized. eCodus is one of the early projects in 2005, was their pilot. They've actually digitized 2,539 manuscripts. Their goal is to digitize all of the medieval manuscripts in Switzerland. So if I was to look at one manuscript a day, it would take me 7 years to look through their collection. Now, if we hop to the Vatican, their goal, and they started in 2010, is to digitize all 80,000 of their manuscripts. They have roughly a little over 21,000 done now. And if I was to look at one a day, it would take me a little over 59 years to do that. That's a lot of manuscripts out there. And I'm only looking at 2 projects right now. So we've got a wealth of medieval manuscripts out there. The other thing is the recovery of new content through digital means. Now, one of the great things that kind of got us started with that recovery was the work of Kevin Kierden. He started out working with literally video to try to recover electronic Beowulf project, which is well known to everybody. Then, of course, kind of, wow, the real game changer was the Archimedes palimpsest project. Keith Knox, Roger Easton, just 2 wonderful imaging specialists, literally kind of rewrote the book on how to recover damaged manuscripts through digital means. We also currently have the Lazarus Project, Gregory Hayworth, and again, Roger Easton is there, Michael Phelps, Ken Boyston, and Chet Van de Duzer. Greg has actually moved that project to Rochester University and has just a wonderful PhD program where he's working with a number of fabulous grad students, and they're actually graduating and moving out into the world right now. Helen Davies is currently at the University of Colorado, Colorado Springs, and Callahan Huskin is actually working in Germany right now at Hamburg University at their lab. We also have places like the Hill Museum and Manuscript Library with global operations. They're literally going into manuscripts in Ethiopia, Croatia, Ukraine, Syria. Many times those manuscripts are at risk of being damaged or destroyed. So the work they do is absolutely amazing. They also have an amazing microfilm library. Then we've got smaller projects that are kind of starting up. The manuscript lab at the University of Hamburg, which is doing wonderful work, where Kyle actually is graduate of Greg's program. We also have the Vatican Film Library, which is another small project at St. Louis University, or a relatively small project. But they have microfilm of 37,000 manuscripts from the Vatican collection from the 1950s. So that's really a rich access of digital data. One of the things we always have to remember when we're dealing with images is manuscripts age. They lose their ability to represent themselves. Pigments flake off, there's tears. They can be damaged in all sorts of ways. So having those past collections is really, really important. One of the libraries that's really pushing to get all of their past imaging efforts digitized and available. The Boatland is just doing wonderful work here. This way, we can look back at those past images and sort out how manuscript is aging, which is very valuable information. We also have, and my slide just kind of went a little funky, but we have the work that's being done with CT scans and X-ray phase contrast imaging. And through those methods, Vito Macella and a team actually was able to see letters. And then we had the wonderful team. It was an international group that was able to literally unfold, without taking them out of the envelope, letters from the 1500s. And just to kind of put kind of a topper to things, we've got a project being worked on now, funded by the NEH, by Tanya Hans, Mackenzie Carr, and David Messenger, that is trying to bring to people a very affordable multispectral imaging system. Their system is targeted at about $5,000, is another way of gathering data and recovering damaged content from all sorts of sources. It's really exciting project. The other thing that's happening with digital technologies and why we're in such a golden age is just the variety of methods we have out there. We've got a RGB, which is just collecting red, green, and blue wavelengths like the human eye does, but we also have multispectral, hyperspectral, ultraviolet fluorescent. We have Raman spectroscopy and X-ray fluorescent. We have reflectance transformation imaging, RTI and PTM, which are some of my favorites. We have multispectral RTI, which combining the two. We have photogrammetry and structured light as well to do 3D models. We also have CT and micro CT scans and X-ray phase contrast imaging. One of the things I love about RTI is that it literally shows us the play of light. Example from the St. Chad Gospels, if we look at light from one angle, we have an H here, this last letter where the pointer is to, and it looks like it's an FUH, but in actuality, it's an N. So when we're doing things like dry point glosses and trying to recover them, dry point writing, those lines can reflect light in really a myriad ways, and it's actually scraped into a manuscript, so it's not an exact art. So a technique like RTI really allows us to recover that in dynamic ways. And I keep waiting for a large RTI project where we really start looking at manuscripts and trying to recover all the dry point writing that is in there from the extra book. There's a wonderful project happening right now with the extra book. They've digitized it, they've got it online. These are some raking images from it. And I think it's worthwhile just taking a moment to look at our regular digital images produce something like this, which is really wonderful and it's very legible. However, when we start using raking light, we see this. So suddenly the manuscript comes alive in such a more dynamic way. So I think it's really important for us to keep pushing forward with our technologies and not be satisfied with just simple digitization. You can do RTI with a handheld flash. You can do it with a dome. Somebody who did just a wonderful project, Todd Hannikin, worked with Ken Boyston of Megavision and developed an arc to do multispectral RTI. And you can see the results from it and its benefits as far as recovery, because you get to see the textures as well of the page. And sometimes those textures can lead to misinterpretations of what you're recovering. And there's just some really exciting work being done right now by Alexander Gillespie, James Sargon, and Jessica Lockhart, working with micro CT scans and looking at the bindings of manuscripts. And in this one, James is actually showing us we can see the stitching and we can measure, it's how big it is. When we start thinking about where we've been with digitalization, it's been a relationship with light, the physics of light. What I want to think about is refocusing that relationship from a manuscript to the physics of light, to the human body and the physics of light. The ancient Greek rhetorician Demosthenes, who was once asked, what is the most important aspect of rhetoric? And he said, delivery, delivery, delivery. Well, I want to kind of follow that same vein and say, what's the most important aspect of digitalization? Interface, interface, interface. And why that's important, let me just kind of go very quickly through some interface design work. And this is St. Chad Gospels. And one of the things that I developed was the overlay viewer. And I must admit, it was inspired by the Archimedes Palimpsest project, because I was tired of downloading images and then trying to sort out, putting them or bringing them into Photoshop so that I could overlay them and compare them. When I was working with Litchfield Cathedral, I knew that the cathedral community wouldn't have the power to do this. This is actually an ultraviolet and the RGB, and you can recover little content that way. But it's very helpful if you can recover content with a post-processed image, and you can see that the text comes out much more clearly now, and I can actually read it. The overlay viewer is also extremely helpful with looking at aligning past historical photographs and trying to figure out how a manuscript is aging. In 2000, the Book of Kells actually lost some pigment in a trip to Australia. So when I was working on the St. Chad Gospels, that was one thing I was really concerned about, is the pigment. The St. Chad Gospels is one of the earliest manuscripts to layer pigment. So the technique may not have been as effective. Here is the difference between a 1911 and a 1956 slide that I found in the archive at Litchfield Cathedral. The image before that was from the 1929 photostat copy, which showed no loss. Finally, here's some VR images. I've done it so we can do annotation. So I think most of the things we do scholarly in interfaces, we want to be able to annotate things. It's a very important thing to do. The other thing that's kind of important to do as a scholar is to actually be able to return to something. Here, I've developed a technique of generating a URL for any position you can manipulate a 3D object in. Then you can open another browser, drop it in, and then paste it in, go to it. I can send them that URL and they can look at exactly the angle that I was looking at. So I think thinking about these interfaces that we use so that they actually promote the types of work we want to do is really, really important. However, the flat image or the image of a manuscript works well because a page is square, similar to our screen. However, what do we do with something like the Mappamundi at Hereford Cathedral? We have to be more clever with our interface and do it in parts. And here's actually an image of Hereford Cathedral on their own map. But a screen is not the best way to see a map. A map was made for a human being with 360 degrees of visibility. And even looking at something like a manuscript, the Codex Amiaticus, if we look at it page by page, we get a certain sense of it and we can see its content. But if we see a page, an image from the side, we get a whole nother feel for the manuscript. And no, we wouldn't want to lug that one around with us very much. Thinking of the human body, we actually have 22 to 33 senses. So computer screens and digitalization in the past has really played or taken seriously our sense of sight, which we have a lot of wonderful information from. We normally think of sight, hearing, touch, taste, but we have other senses like proprioception, which is one of my favorite. We know where the parts of our bodies are at all times. And one way we kind of gauge the size of a manuscript or sense its heft is knowing how far our hands need to be apart to actually reach down and pick it up. So by bringing that information into our experience of a manuscript, we collect humanly more data. We also form a relationship with the manuscript. Because who hasn't wanted to touch a manuscript? Ultrasound is a possibility. So it'll be interesting to see how ultrasound develops. Currently, you can kind of push buttons with ultrasound, but if we could project a manuscript page midair and run our hands over it, it'd be just quite wonderful. We can also think about doing something with vibration. It wouldn't be quite as subtle, but we could at least sense the space of a manuscript and where it's rising and where it's falling. Haptic gloves would be great. It'd be nice if we could do it without gloves. They've got a real drawback right now. The ones that are really good are around $80,000 a pair. Other less expensive gloves tend to be fingerless. So they're more developed for capturing motion than actually feel. Now, there's been some really exciting work done with CT scans because suddenly then we're actually captured with depth and height in one shot. So Anders Yenderman has actually been doing and working on digital autopsies. And this is actually a TED talk he gave in 2010. So you can see, we can see the outer surface and we can look at the muscle system. We can also look at the bones. And what happens with the CT scan is that there's different densities of the x-rays that are being reflected back in. So by eliminating certain densities and viewing others, you can actually see different parts of the body. Now, what scientists are doing at this point in time, or at least for autopsies, they're turning it into a flat table. I want to turn it into this. I want to be able to bring our medieval manuscripts, our medieval artifacts like Pictish stone, crosses, or rolls or charters into a VR environment so that we can use our 360-degree vision to actually see and experience a manuscript. Also, I'm very interested in, let me just show a quick demo video. I don't have a manuscript, so we've got to use the dinosaur skull. Once we get a volumetric model, one with depth and height, we can actually use a cutting plane and cut through it and look at any point within our model. So consequently, if we're studying a binding of a manuscript, I can actually go in and cut it to a certain length, and then I can kind of look over and see what is happening with that binding. I can see the stitching. It's possible we can even move through a damaged object and perhaps even read it with some visualization. This will take some serious work for us to get there, but we're moving in that direction in some really exciting ways. All right, that's everything I have. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and I'm looking forward to the discussion at the gathering in a couple weeks. Thank you.